All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to our talk on empathy and empathetic leadership. And thank you both for being here for this conversation. It feels like in the last few years we've been hearing the word empathy a lot for some obvious reasons, but it's become a pretty common refrain in the tech industry and in business in general, which might pose a bit of a problem because sometimes when we overuse these words, they start to lose their meaning. Velia, I want to start with you. Do you feel in any way that empathy is on its way to becoming a meaningless buzzword in tech to add to a growing list of others, or do you feel like it still carries the same weight?
No, I would actually say it absolutely carries the same weight, and it's a word that maybe we didn't call out 10 years ago, but it's the way many of us as leaders should be leading our organizations in order to deliver the right products and services to our consumers. But a lot of that's also about the way we work internally, the culture we create to empower our leaders and to really understand what makes them tick, just so that we could always truly deliver on those products that we want to deliver to our ultimate end consumer. So.
Absolutely, and we're going to dig into a few of those different categories in a moment. But Jennifer, I just want to throw it to you for a second because we're talking about empathy not as a matter of relationship building, but as a business tool. How does empathy lead to better products and services?
Well, I think really understanding the whole view of the persona that you're targeting, the person that's using your products and services, we have to be expert in not just the moment when they're using your products and services, but how it fits into the integration of their business and their lives. And the same thing is true with our employees. I mean, if you think about the last several years, we had employees coming to CEOs like myself for information on how to stay safe, how to survive the pandemic, how to take care of their families, because maybe they didn't trust other authoritative bodies. And so you're now leaning into using a very different muscle when you're trying to help your employees bring the best version of themselves to work every day. So I think empathy has a very broad definition, but it's absolutely an obligation of leadership. It's an important responsibility, and something that at PagerDuty we've really embraced to our own success.
Fantastic, and I do want to get some more details on that as well, so we're going to come back to that. But Velia, just one more for you. During the pandemic, we saw a huge drive towards empathy, and it felt like empathy was a necessity at the time, and it was a lot easier as well to facilitate. We were, for the first time, seeing into people's homes through their Zoom screens. There was a lot of difficult emotions happening during a period where we were all struggling in different ways. Do you feel like there's been a pullback since then? Do you feel like we reached peak empathy, in 2020 and 2021? Or do you feel like that spirit and that perspective has carried on through to today?
Yeah, and I'll use myself as an example, and I think pre-COVID, post-COVID, I think it's all about the way we lead and the way that we manage our teams. I don't think that goes away, and I think actually COVID probably amplified the need for us to have that personal connectivity with the folks that work with our teams. I'm all about technology and all about digital. I've been doing this for a very long time, but there's nothing like human interactions, and I think what it's helped us do is get a little bit more visibility into the homes of folks and get to know what makes people tick. And it's actually allowed us to really leverage our employees a little bit differently. Again, always in the goal of if you've got happy employees, we'll deliver that much better product for our end consumers. So I'm really excited about that.
And as a very quick follow-up for you, it feels like some technologies are better at facilitating empathy than others based on the way in which they're designed. And perhaps both of you can answer this. What do you think what does an empathetic tool look like? What sort of technology services and products do you think are better at fostering empathy between employees or customers than others? What do you think the key characteristics are?
I mean, in terms of the ways of working, I would say that we don't always have to be so formal. So a lot of times we use tools. I use WhatsApp or text messaging just to have more of those frequent micro interactions with folks. And then we use the more formal meetings for maybe more serious business. And then I think on the consumer side, I think you're seeing empathy show up in the way we personalize, customize experiences, the way we bring people into in my business, more those loyalty programs where we amplify that empathy because you're bringing people in with like interests into that family. So we leverage technology very differently.
Yeah, I think we've seen the use of chat, particularly during Zoom, during large town halls where there's constant interaction. And for me as a leader, like, I'm able to get feedback from the whole organization. I can ask them, like, shout out in the chat. What are you worried about? What are you thinking about? I can see the jokes. I can ride the humor wave sometimes in those opportunities. It is a little bit like reading the room, but more specific. And there's a lot of joy, frustration. You see a lot more emotions in that live streaming chat than we did in the past. You know, if you think about coming into people's living rooms, just like it's helped us as team leaders or company leaders get to know the whole employee a little better, in some ways it's made leaders more approachable. You know, when my 17-year-old comes screaming into the camera with a homework problem, or once during a town hall, my husband brought me a bowl of popcorn and everybody now thinks he's a superhero. It probably made a lot of husbands.
That's good advice for the husbands at home.
Very good advice. Show up in town hall with a bowl of popcorn. Immediately popular.
Fantastic. And so in this new environment where we're interacting in a much more remote environment, I imagine there's a lot of folks out there who have colleagues that they've never actually met in person. How do you foster empathy across an organization that has less and less in-person interaction, and perhaps between team members who have never even met in person?
Yeah, I mean, I can take that one first. I mean, we're under a massive transformation, so we've had a lot of hires we've had to make the last few years. So a lot of the folks I never met. I interviewed these amazing people, hired a lot of amazing people, and I never met them until last summer. And it was amazing that we walked into a room and it was like I knew them. And I think this is when we have to over-index on other ways of communicating. And I joke about kind of being the older teenager, but whether it's frequent text messages, WhatsApp, whatever it is, it's more about that frequency and not so much the formality of really getting to know what makes people tick, getting to know them personally. And I think you could do that in other ways. Doesn't always have to be in person, but I think the frequency is really important of the reach outs. So
I agree. I think the frequency is super important, and I also think the human touch. I mean, one of the things that I saw change in our relationships with our customers, because I met a lot of customers over Zoom. You know, Velia is so nice to meet you in person as opposed to just meeting you over Zoom. But like over Zoom during the pandemic, the first thing you said to someone you were meeting for the first time is, "How are you? I mean, how are things going for you? How's your family? Are you healthy?" And I mean, that broke down so many barriers at the beginning of a conversation with someone you're ultimately going to end up negotiating with, potentially. So I think it's kind of changed the order of the human touch in some of our conversations for the better. I think we've also, as leaders, had to learn how to really try and bring our culture to life in different ways. And I've had sort of two really meaningful examples this week here in Lisbon. And Lisbon is a beautiful city where PagerDuty's opened an office, and I was with our office leader who I'd never met in person until recently. And it was so divine to sit down at lunch with his leaders yesterday and find that the PagerDuty culture is almost exactly as I had envisioned it would be, even though we've never met before. And so being super clear about your values, about what it should feel like to be a Dutonian, about how we treat our customers, how we champion our customers over and over again is so important. And you know, as a leader, when it comes to developing culture, you're never, ever done.
Ever.
Because you've got new employees coming into the business all the time who are experiencing your culture for the first time and are going to either be culture carriers on your behalf or be culture detractors.
Yep. And I think that's a really important point. That whole ability to build culture, and this is when leaders really have to show up. So I would say the thing that's changed is you have to be a people leader today to lead, because our groups are so distributed. I have got teams all over the world, and I don't always have the luxury of being in person. But that ability to amplify that through your leader here in Portugal, and for me, wherever our offices are, I think that's critical. And I think it's that frequency and ensuring that we're hiring the right kind of folks in these roles, because you have to have that empathetic gene of being a people leader, I think, to deliver in today's world.
And how does, what does an empathetic approach to managing a distributed workforce look like? Where does empathy come in as you're making decisions on how to build that culture and that team cohesion in a more remote environment?
I think it's clarity of what our vision is, what our mission is as a group. I think the clarity is super important, that we're clear, here's what we're here to do. And I love curious and passionate people. I tend to hire very differently than a lot of leaders. I like that person that walks in that's got a lot of energy and wants to try and come on the challenge. And I think also acknowledging sometimes people don't have that perfect resume. They may not think in themselves that they can do something, and it's the ability to just bring out the best in people. And we've got a lot of work to do. I mean, I can tell you we've got massive transformation underway. I need people that are on their A game, high energy, but that want to be part of a team. And it is a team, and I over communicate and I overdo the whole team thing because we're in it together. It's not about one person or one leader. It's really about how you distribute that more broadly.
I also think you have to be really clear about your purpose. Over the last several years, a lot of people join PagerDuty or partner with PagerDuty because they feel our purpose, but we were never super articulate about it. And a couple of years ago, we decided to go to market and say, like, our purpose is truly to empower teams with the time and efficiency to build the future. In a world where you feel time-starved, where you need automation, you need digital products and services to help you spend more of your time in flow and less of your time on toil and sort of menial tasks, like that purpose became more and more important to us. The other thing that I would say is your digital ecosystem is a big part of how you show empathy to your consumers, your end customers. I mean, Valia's talked about the end customer experience. You can build the most beautiful product or the most phenomenal app to engage your customer with your brand, but if the technology underpinning it fails and that consumer has a bad experience, all of that effort has now gone to waste. So thinking about how infrastructure, how teams, how your front office, your back office all play a role in delivering that perfect customer experience every time, because that is the demonstration of empathy.
Well, I actually want to push that a little further because often organizations feel like they're being empathetic when they're surveying their customers, asking them for their feedback, but oftentimes people don't know necessarily how they feel about things. You can get a better perspective by observing how they interact with a product versus how they say they're interacting with a product. So how does that perspective inform your approach to building empathy for your customers? Do you ask them for how they're feeling, or do you try and explore what it is that they're actually doing and how they're feeling about it in the moment?
Well, the great thing about the developer community that uses our product is they're not shy, and they engage us frequently in places like Hacker News and Twitter and Reddit, et cetera. Like, they will tell us if they want something different or they don't like something. But equally, like, that's perception-based. We like to do more and more over-the-shoulder observation, like how are our users using our product? Because PagerDuty is a digital operations platform. It's frequently used for major incident management. This is interrupt work. It's unstructured. It's unpredictable. You're doing work often under duress because it's mission critical for the company or for your customers. And we want to see how our customers are using a product in that moment, because maybe an extra click or a drop-down box or too many choices or aggravating messaging is not what they need when the shit's hitting the fans, so to speak.
You can say that here.
Thank you.
No problem. I guess I got to give you that permission.
Done.
Yeah, it's done now. When we're talking about building an empathetic organization, a lot of leaders might be tempted to take a one-size-fits-all approach. I'm curious how you take different factors like demographics, geography, you're opening an office here, age differences. How do you look at your entire organization and demonstrate empathy to so many different groups and employee populations at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what we said, clarity of mission, so we're all on the same page, and the way that you execute at that individual level, I think that varies, right? It depends on what they're performing, what their role is in the organization, and I think you learn to modify. That's the whole point of being a leader, because it's not one size fits all. I mean, if I talk to my developer community versus my design community, as we all know that they're always a little bit at odds with one another, very different sides of the brain, and I think it's just about the ability to communicate, we're all on the same mission, here's what we're ultimately trying to deliver, and knowing that you got different styles in that, and that's okay. That's what makes us unique and different. So I think it's just being able to modify approach.
I totally agree, and I think equally, like, your vision when you think well out into the future, I mean, our vision is to build an equitable world where all teams can delight their customers, using automation and digital operations to do that. But we've learned over the last several years that people see and feel and view their own experience through many different lenses, through intersectionality. It's all those demographics that you mentioned, and everybody has a different lived experience, and it's our responsibility as leaders to understand that experience, to learn from it, to respond and make sure that people are seen and heard when their experience is maybe inequitable compared to somebody else's in the organization. And frankly, to create an equal opportunity for every person in your organization to kill it in their career. And I think it would be easy to say, oh, well, everybody's got a free shot, but do they? Like how do we make sure that we're really creating equitability, not just equal opportunity?
Yes.
And to take that a step further, how do you ensure that that stays in place as an organization is growing and scaling and reaching new markets and opening up offices in other countries? How does that challenge amplify as the organization grows?
Well, I think you have to manage building an equitable workforce the way you would any other strategic business imperative. You set goals, you create owners, you fund it, you measure it, you adjust when things are not going well, and you hold yourself accountable. We've been
accountability.
Yeah, exactly. We've been publishing our IDE report annually every year, and every year the results aren't perfect, right? But like building an equitable organization where you've got great representation from the board all the way down is not an easy thing to do, and you are not going to get there if you are not funding, measuring, managing, changing, shifting all the time.
Yep. No, I would agree. It's the accountability. Measure.
Yeah.
Tweak as you go, and you got to continue to modify until we're satisfied, right?
You can't improve what you can't measure.
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back on something you said earlier. You made a comment about how your customers will let you know if things are not to their liking in very public ways. It feels like there might be a disconnect here. Do you feel like customers are empathetic towards the brands and the products that they use? Are customers and the general population less empathetic to organizations now than they used to be, now that they have so many platforms to voice their concerns and issues and,
Well, as the world has
posts.
moved on demand, I just think the barriers to change are significantly lower than they were in the past. I mean, you only need to stand outside a modern coffee shop or office building and watch people toggle between rideshare apps, food delivery apps, dating apps, et cetera. And they're going to go with the best experience in that moment. And so relationships can be more transactional and more transient unless you really, really understand what's most important to your end customer, and really also understand that that's going to evolve. Like their needs change over time as well.
Yeah. I would say in our industry, in retail industry, it's even more in your face when you think about it. So if people aren't happy with products or our website's down, we don't have shy customers, and there's no forgiveness in that direct-to-consumer business. But I actually kind of like the accountability because it forces us, we use products that Jennifer offers, but it forces us to be on our game, right?
Yeah.
I think complacency can also be a very bad plague for a company. So I actually accept the challenge, and it forces us to be on our A game all the time.
All right, so
the customers that are hardest on you are the ones that are going to hold you to the highest standard and drive you to be better, faster.
So you're inviting the audience to send their criticism of your products.
Bring it on. That's how we learn.
I also wanted to touch on something somewhat related but a little bit different. We're talking a lot about having empathy for customers, for employees, for different groups. What about to ourselves? I find that one often falls by the wayside, and there's been so much conversation about mental health and being kind to yourself, but I feel like in this rush to build an empathetic organization, empathetic systems and structures and teams, often we demonstrate greater empathy to others than we do to ourselves. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how we can be better at that.
So we had the luxury of meeting last night.
There's lots of thoughts. Okay.
I do think it's a balance, and I can call myself out on that. I don't think I've completely found the balance. I'm a working mom, so my son is my top priority. So it's taking care of your family. It's taking care of your employees. I take my role of overseeing a very large organization very seriously, so that's always in my top priority, and then there's me. And I would encourage everyone, though, not to follow in my footsteps. I do think if you don't take care of yourself, you really can't take care of all the other things. And it is about finding a work-life balance, especially as working parents. I think it makes it even more complex. But just in general, I think mental health, wellness in general, I do think are critical. So my goal is to put extra emphasis on that, and I think it makes us better leaders. I do.
Yeah, we had a really interesting conversation last night because not only are we both working moms, we both have seniors in high school who are only children who are applying to college, university right now. And, there's just an extra load at home in addition to what we're doing at work. And the first things that sort of fall away are your workouts, the time for yourself, and the things that enable you to be the strongest, fittest, best version of yourself as a leader. And so it's one thing to try and prioritize those things. It's an entirely different thing to manage those priorities, to actually set the boundaries, to ask the people around you for help in maintaining those boundaries. Every time my assistant and I catch up during the week, figure out how we're going to plan my day, I feel like I'm making diving saves to protect my workout time in the morning. And she's not doing the wrong thing. She's trying to make the most of my time. But over the years, we've realized together that if I don't have an opportunity to train in the morning, I'm not as good of a version of myself during the day.
Right.
And yet I feel guilty about that. And so I think to Valia's point, we have to give ourselves grace and make sure that we're putting our own mental and physical wellness first. Put your own oxygen mask on first, I think
Yes.
is what we're trying to say.
So before we wrap up here, I wanted to ask both of you what you think each and everyone in the audience can do today when they get back to their organizations, back to real life after Web Summit, to foster more empathy in their workplace, in their organization, and even in their own lives in a more personal way. Velia, I'll let you start.
Sure. I would just say I go back to I'm a technologist, a digital person at the core, but be a human. I think sometimes, it's like lift your head up from our phones and just get to know people. It's so interesting when you get to know what makes people tick, especially as you're forming teams. I actually do really well when I know a lot about you personally and professionally, and as you build those teams, because we want diversity of thought, diversity of everything sitting on these teams, but it's just get to know as many people as you can. I love even coming to these things, you just meet random people. I got to meet Jennifer. We have so much in common. I never would have met Jennifer.
New besties.
New besties here. Working moms with single children go to college. But there's a lot to be said about that. There's shared experiences. You learn from one another with every interaction that you make. So I would just plead, take the extra 5 minutes. If you're in an office, you're on Zoom, and just get to know the person sitting on the other side. Don't always make it so transactional.
100%. I think that there is an enormous power in reaching out to someone spontaneously, creating the serendipity around just enabling someone to be heard. How are you? How are things going? What's important to you? I have a really great friend at work who will ask me how I'm doing, but then he says, what did you do well? Because I'm so hard on myself. And he forces me to say, oh, well, actually, and I usually it's a backhanded compliment to myself or some form of criticism, but what did you do well? It's a way to reflect back to someone that they are adding value, that they're important. And, the old phone, the actual phone call, works really well.
So having empathy for yourself better enables you to have empathy for others. Thank you both so much for your time. Thank you all for coming out.
Thanks.
Thank